Do you remember this fella?
On Sunday the 12th of April, 15 days after I first displayed symptoms, I decided to return to work. My wife was very worried, particularly given my eyesight had seemed to have been affected by the disease. She did not want to risk a nearly 300-mile drive with our child, given how ill I had been. We agreed that we should go for a short drive to see if I could drive safely.
So you see, it's not just ears we all need to be concerned about, and our hearing. Oh no, sight is very, very important too. That, of course, Dominic Cummings. Now, the reason I'm bringing him up this evening is he's given what I think is a very interesting interview today. I recommend you all read it, actually. I think it was in the newspaper. I've got to say, I agreed with a lot of what he was saying. He was talking a lot about the fact that politics is broken in this country. He believes that it needs a complete new reset. He uses quite colourful language that I won't make people's hair curl whilst they're having their tea. But he's very, very damning about the Tories, about Labour, about the post-Brexit opportunities being squandered. He really says that we need kind of like a seismic change. He goes on about he wants to set up something that he calls a start-up party, which he says talks to real people as opposed to the Westminster bubble and old media and focusing on getting on the BBC Today programme and all the rest of it. What do you make to this? Is this what we need, and is he the man to deliver it?
A, no. B, no. I've got a lot of time for Dom Cummings. I don't know him well, but I have known him for a very long time, 30 years or so. He's got a brain the size of planet Venus. He is an incredibly interesting and engaging character. But I think he doesn't understand party politics.
But that's probably a good thing, many people will be saying. Good, we need less party politicking.
Well, I mean, how should we conduct elections, you might say? Michelle, I think I've got this right. Back in the day, you ran as an independent in your home seat, and you did brilliantly well as an independent. You held your deposit, I think.
I did.
But basically, you need mainstream political parties. You need to get together tens of thousands of people who broadly agree on a proposition. Tens of thousands in order to run a national election, probably hundreds of thousands in order to campaign. I don't think Dom Cummings is the man for that. He is right to say that the Conservative Party is at an incredibly low ebb. But over my entire lifetime, there have been endless attempts to get some new start-up party to march to the sunlit uplands and change the duopoly of British politics. When I was a young boy, the SDP tried it. I think they won. The highest number of seats they won was 6 in a general election, the Social Democrats. UKIP tried it. The highest number of seats they won in a general election was 1. I think it's probably better to try and influence the two main parties and to get them to change. If you're on the left and dissatisfied with the Labour Party, try and influence them. If you're on the right and dissatisfied with the Tory party, try and influence them. And indeed, I'm in the second lane. I would like to change the Conservative Party. I don't think it's fit for purpose at the moment, but I think in 10 or 20 years' time, it will probably be doing better than the Dom Cummings party.
Tom Bewick?
Dom Cummings may have a brain the size of the planet, but I think he's got the personal mannerisms of a CESSPIT. I mean, reading that press release, a lot of it's not repeatable on air. I think that just shows, in a sense, he debases our politics. And, you can have huge ideological differences. I think one of the problems now, you were talking on last night's show about the Uniparty, is that there aren't enough ideological differences and you might say a battle of real ideas about where we take this country forward. That said, I mean, the prescription, are we ruled over by a technocratic elite that pretty much thinks the same, acts the same? You see it in Parliament in terms of the background of MPs. Absolutely. Do we need to shake that system up, both at national level and in other levels of government across these islands? Yes, we do. Is Dominic Cummings the answer to that? No, he isn't, in part because I think he does debase our politics. That clip there that you just showed was, frankly, I mean, it was surreal. It was Yes Minister, almost, in terms of his response. It was about as far away from the real Dominic Cummings as you could possibly go. In this press release today, I think we saw the real Dominic
But he's
Cummings.
not suggesting he should be the leader of this party, right? One of the things I admire about him is he's a remarkably unambitious man, actually. He's not trying to become Prime Minister. He's not like the farce we saw with Monty Panesar trying to become a Member of Parliament. He's just lobbing this in as a grenade and seeing how people react.
You're right, Mark, but I think you said something really interesting, actually, in your first intervention, which is about influencing the existing party structure. When you look at the vote shares going back to Second World War, Labour and Conservative get around about 80% of the vote in a general election, give or take a couple of percent. You use the example of the Social Democratic Party in the 80s. They've just stood a candidate in London who marginally managed to beat Count Binface in terms of the share of the vote, just over 1.6% or something. So it shows that even where you've got established brands like the SDP, it's very hard to harvest those votes at the ballot box, which is why I think what Dominic Cummings actually should be doing is he should be getting on the phone to Richard Tice, offering his services to the Reform Party, because they are at least an alternative to the Conservatives as a centre-right force. And what, they're polling at 13% of the share.
Quite close to Conservatives.
Indeed, that is something to build on.
Well, he talks about Nigel Farage, actually, because he's basically saying that he reckons the Tory party are constantly fretting about what Nigel Farage is going to do next. And he says, they said to him, do you reckon Nigel Farage would be welcoming your new start-up party? And he says, no, because Farage is basically the same as all the other MPs. His orientation is towards the Daily Telegraph and the Today programme. No, he's saying that his orientation is the same as the other MPs. So he's saying that he's driven more towards connecting with the Telegraph and the Today programme, and he thinks it's highly, highly unlikely, that's his quote, that Farage would ever become an MP. He says there's a limit on his support. He says he's popular with a set of people, but he would probably be capped at 15 to 20% of the vote. He doesn't think he would get beyond, say, like the 40% marker that we're talking about. He talks as well about Ukraine, which I thought was interesting. I don't know if you looked at this stuff. He was actually saying that getting into the situation where we've literally really got in deeply when it comes to backing and supporting Ukraine, he says was the absolutely wrong move. He does use lots of choice language, this is what I'm saying, so I can't read a lot of it out directly for you, but he basically says, he calls Ukraine a corrupt mafia state that has basically conned us all, and now we're going to get bleeped as a consequence, he says, and he thinks that it was the wrong thing to do. He says that involving ourselves the way we have with Ukraine, all it's really achieved, not punishing Russia, but driving Russia deeper into the bosom of China.
Well, I mean, again, Michelle, I'll go back to my first point. Dominic Cummings is an extremely interesting commentator, even if he occasionally uses expletives. I think he concedes in his interview, sorry I'm late, I was up drinking till 3 a.m. I don't hold that against him. And he may have some interesting things to say about Ukraine. I do think there is a case that we have pivoted to a position in which Zelensky is treated like some saint, and probably isn't. But what's he going to do here? He hates the Conservative Party. He hates the Labour Party. He's not willing to work with Nigel Farage. He has a particular foreign policy he wants this party to take, which is presumably to pull out of Ukraine. This is an interesting piece of editorial content from a very smart man. It is not a new political party by any size, shape or form, and it can't be, because for all of Dominic Cummings' brilliant talents, he can't work with people. And working with people is pretty much the second rule of politics. The first one is being able to add up.
Nelson says, bring it on, Dominic, the more the merrier. They're fed up, he says, with the Tories. Labour libs need more on the block, so why not get new rules to stop new parties? He says the whole thing needs a shake-up. Dominic and his party would be a disaster, says Chris. Creating a new political party is not like running the Brexit campaign. And Lee says, whatever next, we're going to be hearing that Matt Hancock is going to shake up the country and sort it all out. He says all of this, all of these people need to get a grip. But Dale makes an interesting point. He says the problem is, he feels, his words, that we're stuck with the main two parties, and he says it's not worth voting anymore in the UK.
Listen, I really understand this. I'm a member of the Conservative Party, and I think it was another viewer, Michelle, who said, you know, I agree with John Cummings about the civil services in control. I agree with John Cummings about that. I agree with his view of the blob and that we need to change it. I'm just trying to be practical here. Is there anyone who thinks, even with the Conservative Party at its lowest ebb at the moment, that there are any more than two parties who are competing for government in Britain? There aren't. Now, we might have arguments about whether you want to bring in proportional representation, change the voting system or the rest of it. But I would prefer that Dom Cummings provided his influence through a think tank.
I think that's so wrong, though, by the way. That what you just said, that if anyone thinks that there's more than two parties, essentially you're delusional.
No, there are more than two, but they can't form a government.
Ones, I know what you're saying.
They can't form a government. The Green Party, George Galloway's Workers' Party, Reform UK, cannot win an election due to the rules. You might want to change the rules, but the facts of the matter are there's either going to be a Conservative Prime Minister or a Labour Prime Minister. Well, if we wish to change the rules, let's change them and have a discussion about that. But them's are the rules at the moment. And I would rather Dom Cummings was, influencing those parties rather than trying to set up another one. I think there are 400 political parties in Britain registered in the Electoral Commission.
That's democracy, though, isn't it?
What really disturbs me about this debate, though, is it often comes back to, well, let's just blame the civil service. And don't get me wrong, we need massive reform, and Dom talking about how over-centralised this country is compared to other advanced countries. He's absolutely right about that. But we've got to remember who has been in control of those levers of power since 2010. David Cameron said in 2010, I'll get the deficit down, I won't cut the NHS. Well, he was right about not cutting the NHS. Real-term spending has gone up. But the national debt's gone up from 43% of GDP under Gordon Brown to nearly 100%. That's the size of the whole cake.
There has been a massive global pandemic in between.
Well, Gordon Brown had the 2008 financial crash. There's always an excuse for effectively not building enough houses, spending more on debt interest in terms of, we spend less on schools than we do on debt interest. The truth is, we've had a government in charge for the last 14 years, 5 years of that with the Lib Dems, that have failed to actually address the issues that occupy the minds of the vast majority of British voters, which is about housing, it's about transport, it's about education, it's about health.
Yeah, but
they've taken their eye off the ball.
All the parties were in cahoots about desperately wanting to lock us down for goodness knows how long. I think Labour probably would have had us locked down for longer. And when you lock everybody down, the hand-in-hand policy was to print money like it was going out of fashion, to do stuff like buy people's dinner when they went out.
Well, Michelle, I think that's a separate point. But where I agree with you is, and it makes me weep now even to think about it, we put a debt of about £300 billion onto our grandchildren and great-grandchildren to pay off, that frankly, if that money had been used, just a fraction of that money to invest in our infrastructure, digital infrastructure, the railways, into FE colleges, skills and apprenticeships.
I'm not so sure
we'd have
about
a different kind of economy.
Have you failed the young? Is that the point he's getting at?
I'm not so sure
about that.
I don't think the government is very good at making investment decisions. HS2 would be Exhibit A catastrophic investment decision. When I was a young person, Concorde was supposed to be the great thing the government was going to invest in. I do agree with you, however, that we need to take a longer look at the actual numbers. And if we are going to lock down, and I was mildly in favour of the first one, but then I lost patience, we've got to be honest with the British people. The cost of the lockdown means next year, we're going to have to cut the education budget by 10%, pensions by 15%, the defence budget by 12%. That's the cost of lockdown. We cannot pretend we are in a crisis every year and we're going to pay it back when the good times roll. For the last 15 years, I've been told about the banking crisis, the Brexit crisis, the COVID crisis. OK, if there is a problem, spend more in the bad times, but then you need to actually be prudent in the good times.
Well,
we haven't been.
Well, that's Keynesian demand management, which I'm a big fan of. But I'll just take you back to the end of the war.
Keynes would be absolutely spinning his grave on what we've spent.
This country had as high a tax burden in 1948 as we've got now. Yet a Labour Prime Minister still managed to build hundreds of thousands of homes, cleared the slums. We got comprehensive education eventually after the tripartite system. Universities expanded and therefore opportunity for professional and white-collar jobs. And growth was about 3.5% a year. It's an anemic 1.2% now.
It's pathetic.
And we've got the Chancellor of the Exchequer going on the TV, parading that as some kind of economic
So what's Keir Starmer going to do to change that?
Well, this is part of the issue. I think, we haven't seen the Labour manifesto yet. The one in 45 was called Face the Future. He's got to face the electorate in less than a year's time.
I think he's
got to
nothing.
face the electorate with a programme that, as I say, comes back to the bread and butter issues that most British people care about.